It's estimated hundreds of foreigners have joined the ranks of the Islamists from Europe alone, and there is concern about the threat that they will pose when they return home. Already there are alarming signals coming from some European states. As groups of hardliners have been seen waving black flags in support of Islamic State in Oslo. Similar pictures were taken in the UK, where dozens of jihadists staged rallies and even brought traffic to a halt, as we can see here. Meanwhile, the Dutch Ministry of Defence has warned the country's soldiers not to travel on public transport while wearing their uniforms. And that's due to a fear that servicemen might be attacked by jihadists. Now, to talk more about this, I'm joined by Dilly Hussain, who's a journalist specialising in the Middle East and North Africa. Dilly, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. First off, how serious a threat do you think we're talking about here?
Well, if we're talking about Europe, generally speaking, we have to be very careful in that these terror threats don't come out from nowhere. You know, in the UK, just 3 weeks ago, our Home Secretary announced that there was a raise in terror threat, and then all of a sudden, the Parliament will be voting tomorrow about whether they're going to carry out military airstrikes. Similarly, in Holland, this terror threat and telling army soldiers and police officers not to be wearing their uniform, it came after they announced that the Dutch government will be sending 6 F-16 fighter jets. So we have to appreciate that terror threats don't just come out from nowhere, they come as a result of foreign military intervention in the Arab region. So the Syrian conflict has been going for 3 years, it's approaching its 4th year. There has not been a single terrorist act that's occurred in Europe as a result of it. But now that we're going to see military intervention in Syria and Iraq, then there will be a blowback in Europe.
The UN is obviously extremely concerned about this. If you look at the fact that they've tackled it with this resolution to try and stem the flow of what they see as a European supply of Islamists into Syria. I mean, the question that raises is, how do states look at their own citizens and decide who's a potential terrorist and who isn't?
Well, many British fighters that have gone over to Syria, they've made it very clear they have no intention to come back to the UK, and they certainly don't have no intention to carry out terrorist attacks in the UK. And I'm assuming that's the same for most Europeans that are going over to Syria and Iraq to fight with the rebel factions, including ISIS. Now, I have to concentrate and we have to focus on the element of military intervention. Clearly, Western countries, namely the US and the UK and its allies, have not learnt the lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan.
Now, you
foreign
mentioned
military intervention in the Arab world.
Sorry, I just want to say, you mentioned that some of those people you say clearly have shown no indication of coming back and causing problems in their home countries. But what about these demonstrations that I was just talking about in Oslo and in London, where you're clearly seeing hardline Islamists supporting the jihadists? I mean, isn't that a considerable threat? And if so, what do you think should be done about that?
Well, if there's groups out there carrying out protests in support of a banned organisation, then obviously the law enforcement will deal with that how it thinks is appropriate. But the main fact of the matter is the terror threat. How feasible and how serious is this terror threat that our governments are telling us? And realistically, what's the reality is that usually it's based on no intelligence, it's usually unfounded intelligence, and it's usually facilitating the masses to accept and to support military intervention in the Arab world.
And just very briefly, I mean, given what you just said, what do you make of the comments coming from Holland's Defence Ministry warning their own soldiers not to wear their uniforms in public? I mean, do you think there is a credible concern there, or is this scaremongering?
Well, Marloes Visser, the Defence Ministry spokeswoman, when she announced this, she said that it had no link to Wednesday's announcement of the Dutch government sending in 6 F-16 fighter jets. Additionally, Dick Schoof, who's a counter-terrorism chief, he said this was just a precautionary matter. Now, let's be serious, right? You're going to be sending in 6 fighter jets to bomb another country, and all of a sudden, you're telling your soldiers not to be dressed in uniform. Now, clearly, you must think your masses are either gullible or plain stupid, but there is a clear link between military intervention and a blowback at home.
Journalist Dilly Hussain, thanks so much for joining us.